Welcome, welcome, welcome. How's everybody doing today? Check in and say hello. It's good to see everybody. Hope the sound is going well and you can hear me. Looks good to see you folks today. So we got Erica. What's up, girl? You at work today, Erica? Or are you at the house goofing off? Hey, Eric. How you doing? Good to see you. Andre, I hope you're in the crowd as well. Yeah, making that dollar, lady. I understand. Mel G's feeling better. She's over her headache. I am glad to hear that, Mel G. I umpired baseball games all weekend for 12 and under Top Gun baseball. Had a great weekend except for the 4 o'clock game on Sunday, and some guy decided he could sit in the stands and yell at me because he knew a better strike than I did. It was awful. Andre, hola, good to see you. I hate getting yelled at by strangers. I don't know why I do this baseball thing. Actually, I do know why I do it, because I like the extra money. It's kind of like good ego practice, people yell and insult you all day long. It hardens up the ego. Hello, Ali, good to see you. We're just talking about weekend. Did you have a good weekend, sir? I won't show your comment, Melanie, but yes, I would agree with you. They certainly are. Yeah, they do take it way too serious. Cool. All right, let's see. So how many we got in here so far? Looks like we've got, let me check just to see. Okay, looks like we've got maybe 5 people in here at one time. That's good. That's good. Okay. All right. So we're going to start on chapter 6 today. And if I could, I'd like to take a moment just to orient you to where we are. If you remember from chapter 1 when we talked about periods of development and domains of development, we are right here, remember? So we're still in the infancy period of development, 0 to 2 years. Chapter 4 was physical development. Chapter 5 was cognitive development. This week we're going to talk about personality and relationship development in early childhood, okay? So that should tell you sort of where we are. And each week we're going to, each month we're going to repeat that cycle over. So next week we're going to be talking about early and middle childhood, physical development, and early and middle childhood, okay? So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk a little bit about Erik Erikson. Then I'm going to talk about the difference between primary and self-conscious emotions. We're going to talk a little bit about normal emotional milestones that your children will see early in early childhood. And then we're going to talk about temperament as the beginnings of what we will call the mature personality. And then we'll talk a little bit about raising children and how goodness of fit, being flexible as a parent, can lead to the best outcomes. Okay, any questions so far? I don't see any chatting right now. I'm hoping that means that everybody's just tuned in and ready to go to lecture, right? So, first thing I want to talk about is one of the older theories of personality development, or actually not older, but one of the more well-knowns and one of the ones that you as nursing students are going to hear about. And that's Erik Erikson, his theory of personality development. So we're going to talk about the general overview of the theory, and then I'm going to tell you what he says occurs during the first 2 years of life. So he was a personality psychologist interested in how we develop identity over the lifespan. He actually worked with the Lakota Sioux Indian out in the western part of the United States, where finding an identity and fitting into the larger fabric of the community was a central issue. And that gave him some insights into how personality formed in Western cultures and maybe how personality problems developed. He argued that personality unfolds in a very typical timed pattern where you face multiple crises, or let's call them psychosocial tasks. And as you figure out these tasks, you develop these personality strengths he called virtues. Failure to resolve one of these tasks could lead to what he called maladaptions or malignancies and would impair your ability to progress on to the next stage of personality. So he argued that we have 8 different time-related developmental tasks, or what we would call normative age-graded tasks, if you remember from chapter 1. Now, he called them crises, but he didn't mean necessarily that they were bad or abnormal things. They were just times when you had to figure something out. And if you've ever been stuck between 2 forks in a road, you are having sort of a crisis, if you will. And in fact, Erik Erikson was a person who coined the term identity crisis. Have any of you ever heard of the term identity crisis before? It's what he talked about, and all of us go through an identity crisis in our teen years when we're trying to figure out who we are as an adult separate from our parents and how we fit into this larger world called society, right? Now, he argued if you resolve these crises, you develop the personality strength, a good quality of your personality. So this positive personality quality results as a function of solving the crisis with a sense of balance, okay? You sort of had to find the area in between 2 extremes, if you will. Now, he was a psychodynamic psychologist, just like this guy named Sigmund Freud was. Sigmund Freud was probably the first rock star in psychology, and Sigmund Freud had a developmental theory of personality. Now, he was a little bit different from Erik Erikson because Erik Erikson had some fundamental adaptations that Sigmund Freud would not have liked. Number one, whereas Freud believed that our personality development was beyond our control and we didn't really think about it, Erik Erikson believed that people were consciously involved in their own personality development. People were always thinking about themselves, reimagining themselves, and trying to fit themselves into society. All right. He also differed from Freud in that Freud thought your personality was largely formed by about the time you were 12 or 13 when you completed the Oedipus complex and went into your final sexual maturational stage. On the other hand, Erik Erikson argued that personality actually continues on and you are developing your personality throughout your life as you continue to face these crises. All right. Finally, Sigmund Freud believed that sex was the primary motivator of human beings, whereas Erik Erikson emphasized that really what our main goal was to find a sense of identity and how we fit into the larger world that we found ourselves in. Any questions so far? Eric Fleming's having an identity crisis right now. That is funny, Eric. You know, the interesting thing is, even though these crises happen in predictable times, if you go through traumatic events, you may have to revisit one of these stages. So even though you really develop a sense of basic trust early in your life, if something traumatic which challenges your trust as an adult, you might have to go back and revisit this particular crisis. And so that's a good point to bring up, Eric. So he argued that during the first 2 years, for the first year we were going through the trust versus mistrust crisis, and the second year was autonomy versus shame and doubt. I'll talk about each of them in turn. For the first year of your life, you're absolutely helpless. You can't do anything. You rely on another human being for survival. And you learn during this first year, if this person takes care of you and is sensitive to your needs, you learn that the world is a safe place where people will take care of you and that people are basically good. All right. Now, so he argues that what we're doing, sometimes though, our parents may not fulfill our needs, may not take care of us. If so, we can develop these feelings of distrust, and we might actually withdraw from the world and develop a sense of paranoid depression and psychosis towards the rest of the world. All right. So, but mom and dad need to take care of your needs. Now, but if your mom and dad took care of you too much and didn't show any restraint in that, he argued that you might actually develop sort of a maladaptation he called sensory distortion, which you might actually learn to rely on people too much and not learn to rely on your own self. Now, if you found a particular balance between these two extremes, you would develop what he called the virtue of hope, which is just a belief that the world is a safe place and that people are loving and kind. And there are some people who have attachment disorders as adults. Their first year of life was so bad that they have trouble forming a human bond with another person. On Thursday, when we talk about attachment, we're going to talk about some of the experimental research related to this particular crisis that people have to go through. Okay? Now, during the second year of life, when you begin to walk and talk, you begin to develop the ability to move yourself around your world and choose what part of the world you want to be in and how you want to interact with that world. So you're developing a sense of autonomy. But on the other hand, your parents need to teach you a very important word, and that word is no. That there are some things that are not good to do. So you have to find a balance between developing sort of an initiative to go out and try things, the feelings of confidence to actually step out and leave your parents. But at the other hand, you need a little bit of a sense of control too. And so he argued that you needed to find a balance between not enough control and too much control. A baby who's not allowed to do anything by their parents and who's constantly being called back will develop into a very doubt-ridden baby that is unsure of themselves. On the other hand, if the parents don't put any controls or constraints on the kid will become impulsive and out of control. Now, he argued that balance between these two stages would lead to a virtue he called will, which is sort of the feelings of self-control, the beginnings of self-control. And so this is what a psychodynamic psychologist, Erik Erikson, thought that was important in terms of development in early childhood. Now, just like I told you that Piaget was sort of precognitive, you can say that Erikson was also, in a sense, came from a vein that was precognitive as well. So there's also research that has looked at babies' development from more of a scientific, a hard science point of view, focusing on cognitive abilities and functions, all right? Now, if you'll remember from last week, I suggested to you that there's a period during the first 2 years of life before which the child is not fully aware of themselves as an object, and then there's a period after at which they are sure that they are an object. And if you'll remember the shopping cart study from the video to Think last week, you realize that 14 and 15-year-old kids didn't understand that it was their body weight on the carpet that was keeping them from pushing the cart ahead. And so the human beings' full understanding of the implications of being a self are not fully developed until 2 years. Now, this has implication for the emotions that children feel. And we typically differentiate between what we'll call primary emotions and, oh my goodness. Primary emotions and secondary emotions. So let's talk emotions. If you ever notice children cry an awful lot, and learning to control your emotions is one of the important parts of developing and growing up. So what exactly are emotions? Emotions allow us to communicate to other people how we feel, and they help us to organize our perceptions by understanding what things make us happy and what things make us sad, what things make us excited, and what things make us afraid. So emotions are really important for social interaction and for helping us to understand what we should be doing. It's hard really to describe what an emotion is, and if you talk to 10 different psychologists, you'll get 10 different definitions on what they are. But most psychologists would agree that emotions contain affect, they're either positive or negative, and they contain intensity, they're very active or they're more passive, okay? So you can think about emotions focusing that way. Now, it turns out that infants before the age of 2 do not have objective self-awareness. So there are certain emotions that we don't think children can can experience. But there are some that we think children are born being able to experience early in life. And these are what we would call the primary emotions. Now, research by a fellow named Paul Ekman has found that there are 6 universal emotions that seem to mean the same thing everywhere in the world, no matter how little contact we've had with some cultures. When you go to these cultures, we all make emotions the same way. And he identified these six universal emotions, which is surprise and interest, joy, anger, sadness, fear, and disgust. And if you look at these little babies over here, you can see the top left baby is very happy, the top right baby is sad, the bottom left baby is scared, and the bottom right baby is surprised. These universal emotions occur everywhere in the world, and they are interpreted the exact same way. Now, these universal emotions tend to emerge in children within about the first 6 months of age. But these emotions do not require you to have a sense of self. I don't have to be thinking about me to be scared. I don't have to be thinking about me to be happy. I don't have to think about me to be angry. I don't have to think about me to have any of these primary emotions. Now let me flip back to the other slide. On the other hand, there are some emotions that require a certain amount of cognitive functioning. In order to have some emotions, you have to have a sense of self-consciousness. And think of these as more cognitive, thoughtful, and maybe culturally influenced emotions, right? So these emotions are like embarrassment, shame, guilt, pride, and jealousy. See, in order to have jealousy, I have to know that I don't have something that you have that I want. In order to be embarrassed, I have to understand that I want you to feel a certain way about me, and if you don't, that doesn't make me feel good. So some emotions actually require self-awareness. The question is, when do these self-aware emotions begin to develop? And research suggests that some of these self-aware emotions, just like the rudiments of objective self-awareness, will begin to emerge around 10 or 11 months of age. So in the video To Think that we watched last week, you notice that children begin recognizing themselves in the 12 to 14 month age range. There's research done by Mize where she found that some children seem to experience jealousy, right? So they had moms play with either a book or a lifelike doll in front of the children, and they measured the kids' brain activity, and it seemed like the infant babies at 9 months of age had electrical brain activity that was similar to jealousy. Now, you don't know if that was actually jealousy occurring in the brain because EEGs are pretty broad measurement instruments, and you don't know if the child's brain is fully developed. But there are some researchers who think that self-conscious awareness, self-conscious emotions begin to develop around the end of the first year. Any questions so far? Now, one of the most important things that you have to teach children is how to regulate their emotions. Any of you know a coworker that gets angry really easy? Any of you know a coworker that cries at the drop of a hat? Any of you know a coworker that cannot control their emotions? Isn't it annoying to be around a coworker that cannot control their emotions? How many of you are dating a person or married to a person that cannot control their emotions, that screams and yells? I met a coach this weekend that did not have the ability to control his emotions. Absolutely. Emotional regulation begins in infancy, and it is something that you have to help a child develop as they grow up. Some parents don't, and that leads to disastrous, angry consequences, right? Now, emotional regulations. Infants cry because they have no ability to control the duration and intensity of their emotional reactions. When their amygdala fires up, they don't have the frontal lobe to stop that emotional response. So they experience the cortisol and the arousal burst that makes them cry. But what we do is, as we begin to learn strategies where we can control this emotional response. One of the first things that children do is suck their thumb, or pacifiers. Any of you parents know that pacifiers are very good at helping children calm down. That's a self-soothing method that children learn. And they start that almost at birth. Now, later, children may learn to control their emotions by not paying attention to the things that scare them, turning away from things that bother them. And then finally, as your child develops linguistic ability, they'll be able to discuss their internal states. Doggy scare, and they're communicating to you their emotional feeling, and that's when you can learn to help them regulate their emotions. So during the first year, you're just trying to soothe them physiologically. But as they develop intellectual abilities during that second year and they can communicate, you as a parent need to spend time talking about emotions with your child so they can begin to understand them and begin to control them with this frontal lobe, okay? And then one of the things we're going to talk about on Wednesday night is how much effort you should send soothing a crying baby. The behaviorists thought that if you comforted a crying baby, they would only cry more. Attachment people would say that by comforting a crying baby, they'd cry less. I'd be interested in figuring out how you fall on the spectrum with belief to comforting a crying baby. My ex is LOL. Where's the diapers? Yeah, right? Some of us do know adults that did not learn emotional regulation. And you know what? Emotional regulation in early childhood is a very good predictor of adult success. Really, you can learn your ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s, but you really need to learn how to control your emotions. And that's something you folks need to think about with your children. Now, there are some very normal emotions that kids are going to experience that demonstrate that they're actually bonding with the parent. And these emotions are separation anxiety and stranger anxiety. Separation anxiety is the fear that children have of being separated from their caregiver, and separation protest is the strong emotional response that they demonstrate when separated from their primary caregiver. What this means, starting around 7 or 8 months, is that they've developed an attachment to this primary caregiver, and they can differentiate. They have the cognitive ability to differentiate their parent from other people, and they can tell when the parent is there in a way. There in a way is really what it is. And they develop that intellectual ability. Remember, we were talking about developing conceptions of size and height and gravity. Well, developing there and not there is an intellectual development as well. And as they develop this, they begin to fear the separation with the parent that they developed such a strong bond with. This is going to peak around 15 months of age, and it is nothing to be embarrassed of. It's just normal attachment behavior. Now, if the child has difficulty soothing himself when the parent comes back, at that point, we might talk about maladjustments in the attachment process, right? Now, the other feeling that kids are going to have is stranger anxiety. Can't tell you how many parents I meet who have a 12-month-old who are absolutely mortified when their 12-month-old is scared of me because they think that's abnormal. Again, your child's developed the cognitive ability to tell you apart from other people, and the child prefers you, and they develop this healthy fear of strange things because they still rely on you for safety. So stranger anxiety tends to show around 6 months and peaks sometime in the second year of life. Now, what I've always heard is if you're going to send your kid to daycare, send them to daycare either before they're 6 months of age so that they can develop attachments of some sort with their daycare workers, and that these daycares aren't stranger, or wait till 3 years when attachment is over. And I can tell you that I took my kids to daycare when my oldest son was 3 and my youngest son was 1.5 years, and my oldest son had a smooth transition, and my youngest son cried for months. It was absolutely terrible. Now, stranger anxiety is less severe in familiar environments, so that way if you have the kid in the classroom before they begin to develop this stranger anxiety, they feel like they're on home turf, if you will. It's it's less severe with strange children than it is with strange adults. So if you've got some children in there, it's going to help the child out as well. And it's also less severe with strangers who are smiling. So make sure you get yourself a happy daycare operator. Not all of them are like that. Any questions so far? It sounds so hard to get right. You know what? Yeah, but it turns out as long as you go with your gut instincts and love your baby, you can follow some basic 10 points of advice. It's not too hard to raise a good baby. I would say. It's all about coaching them to deal with the natural realities of life. Some parents like to prevent their kids from having negative emotional response. And when the kids have the negative emotional response, instead of teaching them how to interpret and deal with those negative emotional responses, most parents try to shut them down, as if non-demonstration means that the feelings have gone away somehow. You need to teach your kids how to actively deal with these emotional responses. Okay, now, crying and smiling are methods of communicating with the caregiver that your kid uses before they can start talking. Crying means something's wrong and I need some help, and smiling means love me and take care of me. Both of those are very important for developing the infant and adult attachment that develops during the first couple of years of life. Now, most moms will tell you that they're very good at differentiating between different kinds of baby cries. I think I had some sort of sense of it, but I always felt panicked because it wasn't completely obvious to me when my baby was crying. But they basically say that parents are good at distinguishing just a general tired crying, an angry cry, and a pain cry. And most adults are really good at distinguishing anger from pain cries. And most mom will tell you they can distinguish lots of different cries from their mothers. And it turns out that parents are better at distinguishing the cries of their babies than they are others. Now, if your baby's excessively crying at 3 months, this actually suggests anxiety and hyperactivity disorders at the age of 6. And this might have to do with the primary caregiver being anxious and uptight. Now, I decided to change this week's weekly webinar. Instead of doing the baby human to feel, I've put a bunch of videos about soothing crying babies. And there's this one doctor who's got this thing called the hold method, and he guarantees that he can stop a crying newborn in less than 5 seconds. And there's tons of video evidence of him doing that. He's even on I think it's a Japanese talk show, and they give him a room full of crying babies, and he walks around like the baby whisperer, just shutting all these babies up with a couple of jiggles. It's absolutely amazing. You have to watch this particular, these set of videos. And then we're going to talk about, and then I've got an Oprah episode where a lady says that she can tell 5 different communicative statements that children make before the age of 1 year that tell you what they need and what they want. So we've got an Oprah show and this doctor with a magic baby crying trick. Please watch these videos and then come to class on Wednesday. We'll have a great time talking about this. Okay? Now, babies will begin to smile very early in life at 1 month, but this is not what we call the social smile. This is not a voluntary smile. This doesn't mean the baby likes you yet. This is just an innate reflexive kind of grimace that the baby will make. The actual social smile occurs around 2 to 3 months of age. And your baby, if you have a smiling baby at 7, this is going to be predictive of a baby with better self-regulation at 7 years. So, babies do cry, but to the degree that you can help babies begin to self-soothe at 3 months and get them into a happy frame of mind at 7 months of age, you tend to have better luck with having a baby that's going to have emotional self-regulation at an early childhood. So this is where we really begin to work on that ability to develop emotional self-regulation. Now, the crazy thing is, this relationship with the infant is reciprocal. not only does the baby's emotional state cause you to change, but your emotional state causes the baby to change. And so one of the things you really need to work on, Eric, is when your baby cries, go into dead man emotional state. You want to be totally calm. Some parents get uptight when their baby's crying because they just want their baby to stop crying because they're feeling anxious. My baby's hurting and that makes me hurt. When you get upset and anxious because your baby's crying, your baby actually can feel that, and instead of making them calm down, it actually multiplies their arousal and their anxiety. So you need to be the super calm person when your baby cries. And it's really hard to when your baby's crying at that loud level. But just remember that a crying baby is not going to die. All right? Just because they're crying does not mean that baby's going to die. It means they're not happy is what it means. It means they might need food, they might need their diaper changed, or they might need to be burped. But sometimes babies just cry. And so if you can go into your James Bond mind and just go, I am totally cool, calm, and collected, that coolness that you feel will feed into your baby and help. May not solve the problem, but it won't exacerbate the problem. I know, Andre, I wish I'd known that back when my kids were babies. Mine didn't cry as much, but it would have been great to walk around at cocktail parties and say, watch this. Shake your baby a couple times and make that sucker stop crying. But it's really amazing. He holds the babies with two hands under their butt and across their chest with their arms folded in like this, holds them at a 45-degree angle, and wiggles them slowly back and forth, and then he'll even wiggle their butt like this, and it takes about 5 seconds, and the baby will go from screaming and crying to not crying. It only works the first couple of months because then they get too big to do that, but it's an amazing technique. Now, sensitive pairing is associated with lower levels of infant fear. Initiating talk about emotion creates a toddler's helping and sharing abilities. So, responding to your child, being the calm person when they're emotional and helping them self-soothe is going to lower their level of being one of those fraidy babies and being scared of things. You want a baby that's exploring, because when babies are exploring, they're stimulating that brain and it's growing. And if you start talking to your kid about their feelings, the earlier you do, it actually helps them to understand other people's negative emotional states so that they're more likely to help and share. Some pro-social behaviors that are based on empathy, which is another personality characteristic, which is self-conscious, because I have to be able to imagine myself feeling you in order to help or share. Just empathy. We can all feel each other's stress and tension. It absolutely is. The only difference being is that I can feel your anxiety level, but maybe it doesn't fundamentally change who I am as an anxious person. In the first couple of months and first year of life, that feeling of arousal, I have trouble self-soothing. So the fact that you're not helping me soothe is going to make my emotional experience a little bit stronger. I can hear your sad story and it'll make me cry, Eric, but then I can recover my emotional state after I finish talking to you. The baby can't do that as much. Now, final thing I wanted to talk about was this concept of temperament. Personality requires objective self-awareness. Personality as a final mature construct does not develop until the teenage years. In fact, you can't even be diagnosed with a personality disorder until you're at least 18 years of age. Your personality is not formed at all when you are born. In fact, you have the rudimentary beginnings of a personality. We'll call these rudimentary beginnings of a personality your temperament. Okay? And so your temperament is just your individual differences in behavioral style. The whether or not you're exploratory or restrained, whether or not you are super duper happy or super duper sad, and how easy it is for you to change from emotional state to emotional state. Right? And psychology researchers have become interested in trying to figure out how early do reliable differences in temperament show themselves, and how do they relate to adult patterns of functioning? Now, probably the earliest research was instigated by some researchers, Chet and Thomas, in the 1970s. And they had parents rate children on, I think it was 10 or 15 different kinds of daily activities, the ability to change to difficulty changing activities, soothability, the amount of positive affect versus not negative affect, fear of strangers. And they had all of these different kinds of behaviors and checklists. And they asked parents to evaluate their young children on these. And they came up with 3 sort of general behavioral styles that you'll see in children. And the first style, they came up with what you might call the easy child. And this is the child that's generally happy, that's easy to that finds it easy to maintain a positive emotional state, and they also tend to be more exploratory or extroverted than introverted. And so these are the children that aren't afraid of new stimulations, new objects, and they're easy to calm down. So they weren't difficult to calm down, and they tended not to have great fear responses to change and new objects. These are what you would call easy children, and they found that about 40% of the children are what you might call easy children. On the other hand, some children had strong emotional responses and were difficult to calm down and to reduce the negativity of their emotional states. These children were also afraid of novel objects and new stimulation. These children tended to cry a lot, and they labeled them difficult children. About 10% of the children were like this. They were afraid of things and they cried a lot. Now, some of the children didn't cry as much as the difficult children, and they had sort of more of the easily moderated emotional state, but they were still afraid of novel stimulation. And they called these slow to warm up children. And about 15% of the children demonstrated this style. And these styles could be seen very early in the child's life, within months of being born. And they found that these patterns were remarkably stable through childhood. Easy children tended to be exploratory and easy to calm down as early children in early childhood as they were in infancy. The difficult children still had emotional regulation problems and fear of change and novel events in early childhood, and the slow to warm up children had the same sort of experiences. Now, this is one way to think about children's, the emotional ability, their ability to calm themselves from extreme emotional states, and also their willingness, their desire, interest in being stimulated by novel objects and novel objects and change. Now, there are other sort of infant temperament styles that have been researched to see whether or not there are other qualities which are more important. So a researcher, Kagan, focused on inhibition versus uninhibited. All right. And so this really is, so they would show kids new objects and see how strong their negative reaction was to these objects. And some children demonstrated a more inhibited style than an uninhibited style. And what they found is, while this was related to inhibition at 2 years, you could train your kid out of a sense of inhibition. Now, kids who are super inhibited tend to be more likely to develop anxiety disorders and phobic disorders. So there's a high number of anxiety disorders and neurotic disorders in depression in in childhood and adulthood these days. I'm wondering if this is the function of parenting styles where parents are afraid to adjust their child's inhibited behavior. So the idea right here is that you need to coach your children during early childhood. You don't force them, but what you do is you coach them a little bit to try new things, and you sort of want to work them out of this inhibited behavior. Okay? Now, and what they found is that these children with inhibition demonstrated higher cortisol level, heart rate, and activity in the frontal right lobe, the fear lobe, and that these sort of physiological responses were related with inhibition. So it may have something to do with how the brain is wired. Okay, now Rothbard and Bates came up with a dimensional model where they looked at extroversion, okay, and negative activity, which is kind of like Chess and Thomas's extroversion and negative activity, okay, but they added a third dimension, which was effortful control, which was how easy the child was able to control their emotions and emotional responses. And they believe that effortful control might be the most important of these qualities. The ability to control your emotions may be the most important part of your temperament for determining success later in life. So Chess and Thomas might say, and Kagan might say it has to do with being inhibited and afraid from new things, and that's important. But I think Rothbard and Bates says your ability to control your emotion is probably the most important quality. And they found that effortful control, the ability to control your negative emotions, is associated with academic success, school readiness, and a decreased likelihood of ADHD. So it really seems to be about helping your child learn to control their emotional lability, their ups and downs. And you do that by soothing them in early infancy and then starting to talk to them about their own emotions early on at the end of the first year and into the second year, where you talk to them about the emotions that they feel and how it's okay to have these emotions and to move past them. So really, it's kind of all about the coaching. And that follows into this idea of parenting tip. There are no such things as bad babies, and there are no such things as bad environments. Well, there are some bad environments, but really the most important part is the fit between the baby's environment and the baby's temperament. So temperaments are not inherently bad. What's bad is a mismatch between the environment. You have to respect the child's individuality. I had a friend that when his kids were 4 years old, they were a little bit afraid of the water, and so he just picked them up and threw them straight in the pool that he bought for his house and freaked his kids out. And his idea was just to go ahead and get them over their fear by this rapid exposure. I don't think you necessarily want to do that. If your child's shy, you have to work them into it. You can't put them in situations where they're not going to succeed. If your kid is a high energy kid, you have to put them in environments where they can express that high energy. If your child's a little more reserved, then maybe you protect them and provide a little more reserved environment. So the idea is that you have to fit the environment to the kid. While you're still trying to coach them out of their inhibition, you're trying to control their emotional regulation too. So it's all about, again, the balance that Erik Erikson would have suggested. And you, the parent, want to create an environment that coaxes your kid out while still allowing them to learn how to control their emotional swings. Remember, structure the environment to fit to the kid, and we don't label our kids. We don't use labels. Oh, he's an angry baby. He's a tough baby. He's a difficult baby. No, instead, we just structure the environment and teach them to master feelings of inhibition and develop this ability to control their emotions. All right. Any questions today? Any questions? Did it work? What are you asking? You're asking a question. Did what work, Eric? I haven't looked down at the chat in a while, so I've forgotten what you might have shown. Oh, did it work? Throw in the kids. Yes, they are certainly some aggressive, extroverted kids. There's some other issues going on that I'm not necessarily as excited about. The kids definitely aren't afraid of anything, but I think there might be some self-regulation abilities that weren't that needed to be developed as well. But yeah, they're certainly not scared of anything. That's for sure. They actually were, yeah. They could be little monsters. Well, that's it. That's all I really had to say for today's lecture. Do you have any questions for me? Anything you want to know about? I'm sitting here in front of Beetle Bailey again. I'll change my background next week. How do you folks like the collared shirt? I actually wore a collared shirt for you. This is my first collared shirt of the semester. One of my students was mentioning the novelty of it, and I was like, hey, Buster, we're in a coronavirus. T-shirt is the new uniform, right? Okay, fantastic. Thanks to everybody who came today. If you have any questions, I'm going to hang on the chat bar for just a couple of minutes and answer them, or I can send you a text using Remind. But otherwise, I'm going to log off, and I hope to see you tomorrow at Wednesday when we talk about comforting babies in the magical baby hole. Take care.